The hall of banners shimmered with alien light as delegates from 100 worlds gathered to hear the terms of peace and judgment after a war that had burned across the spiral arms for a generation. At the center stood the alien queen named Lyra, whose presence bent the air with authority and age her crown a living lattice of crystal that reflected the faces of those who feared her and those who hoped for mercy. Across from her stood a single human named Adam, chosen not for rank or wealth, but for endurance and the quiet resolve that had carried his people through famine, invasion, and the long dark between stars. Humanity had arrived late to the galactic stage and early to the trials of survival, and so they had learned to adapt, to endure, and to protect one another with a stubborn loyalty that others found baffling. When the war began, humanity had been small in number and poor in allies, yet rich in will and ingenuity, and they had fought, not to conquer, but to survive, and in doing so, they had changed the balance of the galaxy. The council hall was silent as Lyra regarded Adam with eyes like twin moons and the memory of countless centuries, and she spoke not with thunder, but with a murmur that carried farther than any shout. If only you were my husband human. The hall fell silent. The words rippled through the assembly, and even the ancient machines that recorded the proceedings seemed to pause as if surprised by the turn of fate. Adam did not bow, nor did he boast. He stood as he always had, with shoulders squared and hands open, a gesture that among humans meant honesty rather than surrender. Those who knew humanity well understood that the strength of the species lay not in physical might, but in bonds forged under pressure, and in promises kept when breaking them would have been easier. Lyra studied him, and in her gaze were not desire or whim, but calculation and respect, for she had watched humanity rise from the edge of extinction to a force that could stand before her throne without trembling. She recalled the first encounters when human envoys had arrived with patched ships and worn smiles, offering trade, knowledge, and friendship to those who had expected tribute or fear. They had listened more than they spoke, and when they spoke they asked how they could help rather than what they could take, and this had unsettled empires built on dominance. During the war, humanity had opened their borders to refugees of many species, sharing scarce resources and defending worlds not their own, because the concept of us had grown larger than the concept of mine. Adam had led evacuation lines through burning skies and had negotiated ceasefires in ruined cities, standing between armies. With nothing but a translator and a steady voice, stories of his deeds had spread across the stars, carried by those he had saved and by those who had failed to break his resolve. Now, before the queen, he represented not just a species, but an idea. That cooperation could outlast conquest, and that empathy could be a strategic advantage. The council murmured softly, and then fell silent again as Lyra raised a hand and the living crown brightened. She spoke of history and cycles of rise and fall, and how empires that relied on fear eventually collapsed under the weight of their own cruelty. She spoke of humanity as a variable that defied prediction, a species that turned weakness into innovation and loss into unity. Adam listened, and those near him noted that he did not interrupt nor seek to persuade, for he trusted that truth carried its own momentum. When Lyra finished, she stepped down from her dais, an act no queen of her kind had done in living memory, and she stood before the human at equal height. Her murmur returned softer now, and meant for all and none, as she acknowledged that alliance bound by respect would be stronger than any forged by force. The suggestion of union was symbolic yet potent, a recognition that humanity had become a partner in shaping the future rather than a subject to be managed. Adam replied with humility, stating that humanity sought friendship, shared responsibility, and the chance to build a galaxy where survival did not require domination. He spoke of children on distant colonies who looked up at unfamiliar stars and deserved a future free from endless war. He spoke of veterans who carried scars and still believed peace was possible if courage included compassion. The hall listened, and something shifted in the collective mind of the assembly as old assumptions loosened their grip. Lyra inclined her head and declared an end to hostilities and the beginning of a covenant that would weave human resilience into the fabric of Av. Galactic governance cheers rose from unexpected quarters, and even those who had opposed humanity found themselves reconsidering the measure of strength. As the delegates dispersed, whispers followed Adam not of fear, but of curiosity and respect. The alien queen watched him go and allowed herself a rare smile, knowing that the future would be shaped not by crowns alone, but by the quiet determination of a species that refused to give up. And so the galaxy took a step toward a different destiny, guided by the lesson that survival paired with kindness could change the course of stars. In the days that followed, envoys from many worlds sought human counsel, asking how a people so young had learned to stand together when older civilizations fractured under pressure. The answers were simple yet difficult. Practice empathy, share burdens, and remember that survival is a collective act. Adam returned to his delegation, where engineers, farmers, scholars, and pilots waited not as subordinates, but as family bound by shared purpose. They discussed rebuilding routes, restoring habitats, and teaching defensive arts that prioritized protection over annihilation. Human ships became hubs of cooperation, their modular designs adapted to alien needs, and their crews trained to listen as well as lead. The Queen sent observers to learn, and they returned with reports of humans celebrating small victories, mourning losses together, and finding joy even in scarcity. This baffled strategists, who had long believed morale was maintained by spectacle and fear rather than trust. On frontier worlds, joint teams formed, mixing species that had once been enemies, and they found that shared labor dissolved old grudges faster than decrees. Children learned multiple languages by play, and elders exchanged stories, discovering common hopes beneath different skins when threats emerged from beyond known. Space humanity did not call for preemptive strikes, but for preparedness and unity. They built networks of early warning and mutual aid, turning vulnerability into resilience. Lyra convened the council again and cited human methods as models for the new era, emphasizing transparency, accountability, and the value of dissent. Some resisted clinging to traditions of hierarchy, yet results spoke louder than pride. As trade flourished and conflicts waned, Adam declined titles offered to him, preferring to remain a bridge between worlds and a voice reminding leaders of the people affected by their choices. He traveled, often visiting shipyards, academies, and refugee centers, listening to concerns and celebrating achievements. In private moments, he reflected on the Queen's words and understood them not as personal desire, but as acknowledgement that partnership required intimacy of trust. Human culture adapted, absorbing influences while maintaining a core belief that dignity was not a finite resource. Festivals emerged, blending music, art, and cuisine, and laughter echoed through stations once known only for alarms. Historians marked the covenant as a turning point, yet veterans knew it was sustained by daily choices to act with courage tempered by care. When setbacks occurred, humanity responded with learning rather than blame, and invited others to do the same. The galaxy began to mirror this approach, finding that cooperation reduced the cost of mistakes and amplified successes. Lyra observed from afar, intervening less as systems grew self-sustaining, and she credited the human habit of empowering local solutions. In time, myths arose portraying humans as unbreakable, yet Adam corrected them, insisting that strength came from admitting fragility and asking for help. Educational charters spread, teaching conflict resolution alongside science and art. Defense fleets trained in restraint, valuing de-escalation and protection of civilians. Trade corridors, once patrolled by dreadnoughts, now welcomed caravans and explorers. The memory of war did not vanish, but it lost its power to dictate the future. At a later assembly, Lyra addressed the hall and echoed her earlier. Murmur transformed into a declaration that partnership had reshaped destiny. The silence that followed was not shock but reflection, as leaders recognized. The quiet revolution underway, humanity had not conquered the stars, yet had changed how they were shared. Adam stood among many, not apart, and felt the weight of responsibility, balanced by collective will. As new generations rose, they inherited a galaxy more open than the one their ancestors had known. They carried forward a simple lesson proven again and again, that when faced with the vast unknown, choosing to stand together could turn survival into hope. Explorers ventured farther, guided by shared maps and shared rescue protocols, ensuring no crew would be abandoned to pride or distance. When disasters struck, responses were swift and coordinated. Transcending old borders, artists captured these moments, shaping narratives that celebrated cooperation over conquest. Songs told of hands reaching across voids and of courage found in community. Scholars debated the philosophy of collective security, refining principles that balanced autonomy with obligation. Markets adjusted, valuing sustainability and fairness, recognizing that stability benefited all. Adam aged as years passed, yet his role diminished by design. As institutions matured beyond any single figure, Lyra likewise prepared suck.